So today I'd like to talk about the idea of key and scale in music. Um, if you know what a melody is already, single notes played consecutively that make a tune, and if you know what a chord is, which is harmony, and you know how to make a chord, it might not be too early to start to think about key and scale. The idea of key in music is that there's a central note that's kind of like a center of gravity that the music wants to resolve to. So you can even find the idea of key within melodies. So if you take Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, the last note, more often than not, is going to have a sense of finality about it that sounds like the song is done. And that means that this song is in the key of C. And that's just an intuitive thing that you can feel about songs. Usually the last note of the melody is the key of the song. So this is this kind of resolved feeling that we get. Let's do another song. If Mary Had a Little Lamb, I'm just going to play the ending of it. Is in the key of C. Now you can play different songs in different keys. So for instance, there I played it so Mary Had a Little Lamb was in the key of E. Again, the last note is going to be very often the key. I'm going to use the C, the key of C to start with since it's an easier one. So let's assume that we're in the key of C, even if you don't quite understand what that means. And so that C is our home note. So everything between C and C is going to form our C scale. And in this case, it's all white notes. So it's an easy one to start with. Now, there are plenty of scales that use some black notes or all the black notes and some white notes, and it can get pretty confusing. In fact, there are 12 different keys that you could be in. But we're going to start with the one that's all white notes. So it's easiest to see on the keyboard and it's easiest to talk about. So here we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and back home to C, and that's our C scale. So you'll notice that there are 7 unique notes, and then we take it back home to the first one again. What that means is that when you're in the key of C, most of the notes that you're going to be playing are these white keys. And in fact, in many songs, all of the notes you're going to be playing are these white keys. So if I was doing Let It Be by the Beatles, the melody, which by the way is in the key of C, now you can imagine this would be really helpful to know what key you're in and what the scale is, what the group of 7 notes is that defines that key. If you were trying to play something by ear, all of a sudden that means this is 5 notes that you don't have to try. These black notes, you can just ignore them because you know that most of what you're going to hear is coming from this scale. So that can be a really useful tool, this idea of scale and key. It also means most of your chords are going to be all white keys as well in the key of C. So the chords come from the scale, from the key. Now another variation on this, we call this the major scale when it has 7 notes and then it goes back to the first one. And there's a pattern to this, and we can divide everything on the piano into half steps. In other words, the distance between each white and black key, or white and white, whatever's right next to it. These are all called half steps. And it's important to see these half steps because that helps you count and measure things on the piano. It's like a ruler. So if we wanted to find the major scale, what is the pattern? Well, we don't play a black note here. So what that means is we're doing 2 half steps to get from C, 1, 2, up to D. Now 2 half steps is called a whole step. So I'm going to write W for whole. Excuse me, here, I'm going to write it so you can see it. W, whole step. Up to E is 2 more half steps, another whole step. E to F, just a half step because there's nothing in between. There's no black key in between. H is for half step. F up to G, 1, 2, 2 half steps, make a whole step. G up to A, 2 half steps, make a whole step. A up to B, again, same thing. And then back home to C, our keynote, our center of gravity, our tonic is the technical term, is a half step. So the pattern for a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And if you remember that, you can find a scale on any key. So if somebody says, hey, I want to play in the key of E flat major, well, that sounds kind of crazy, but it'll help to know what is the scale. So what are the 7 notes that we mean when we're talking about E flat major? Well, first of all, what's E flat? This is E. This is E flat, and E flat looks like this. It's that little B, it's a flat. So this is E, but then with that little B, that means you're playing this note. It's the note to the left of a note is the flat, E flat. So here we are on E flat. So what's a whole step up from E flat? Well, 1, 2 half steps. F, that's our second note. And then a whole step up from F, 2 more half steps. There we go, G. What's a half step up from G? This note, G sharp, also known as A flat. And similarly, you could find the whole scale just continuing. Notice when we play those notes, the center of gravity is this E flat. That sounds like we're home. Same with C. C sounds like we're home. So it's helpful to just memorize scales, because when you're playing music, you're not going to have time to count whole steps and half steps. It's good to do because you want to understand how everything fits together. But that's why piano teachers will very often have students just memorize scales, because it's a very helpful way to... Also, it's a good way to start to get your fingers moving in natural ways on the piano. Very often on piano, we'll do things like having our thumb cross underneath other fingers like that. And we'll be using our pinky. Some people, when they play piano, they don't want to use their thumb. Some of them don't want to use their pinky. They just want to... And that's okay at first, to just use your pointer finger and poke around for a while. But eventually you're going to find that in order to play more complicated things, you need to use all of the fingers. So anyway, this is how we find different scales, different keys. Now I want to go back to the simple key of C that's all white notes, because it's easy to talk about, it's easy to see. And I want to show you one other variation on the major scale. Every note of the major scale could have a number. So in the major scale of C, C is 1, because we're in the key of C. Now if we were in the key of D, D would be 1. So whatever key we're in, that's number 1. And then, as we said, there are 7 notes, so I'm going to go up to number 7. A is number 6, B 7, and then C is not 8, it's back to number 1 again. Okay. So in a pentatonic scale, which you might have heard that word before, pentatonic, penta meaning 5, we do not have a 4, and we do not have a 7. And that sounds like this. Sounds a little bit like Chinese or Scottish folk music, and a lot of different folk music, in fact. All the way up to C, and back down. But it's basically 5 individual notes. And what's nice about a pentatonic scale is it's good for melodies, it's good for making melodies, because the notes tend to sound good over a lot of different chords. And it's good for improvising for similar reasons, making up music on the fly. So if I were to put some chords down in the left hand, we'll do white key chords since we're in the key of C. Here's a C chord, and see my other video about how to make chords. I'm gonna go back between C and D minor. I'm just playing notes from the pentatonic scale. I'm trying not to be too deliberate. You can even be a little more random than this. And you'll notice that a lot of them sound very good. It's very workable, these notes. And as soon as you throw in the 4 and the 7, it starts to get a little trickier to make stuff up. You start to get issues like that, and you're starting to see how these notes, if you know how to use them and you can use them well, they can be great. But it's a little trickier to use them. So the pentatonic is a more friendly place to start making up music. And it's also good to know, because if you're trying to find melodies by ear, very often the melodies are in the pentatonic scale. So for Let It Be, I don't even know if this is, I'm just picking it at random. That was all, because here's our pentatonic repeating up here. This is a D and an E, and so this is the 2 and the 3 of our pentatonic. Notice that that melody was all from the pentatonic so far. And then finally we get an F. That's our first note outside of the pentatonic scale. I'm going to play the chorus. This is 6 and 5 of our pentatonic. There's a 4. So far there have only been 2 notes in the entire song that were outside of the pentatonic scale. So it's good to know this. Now, how do you know what key you're in? That's a good question. You can appeal to your sense of intuition and just say what sounds like the right note to end this song on. So in the key of C, or that... Oh, notice that melody, like I said with Mary Had a Little Lamb and Twinkle Twinkle, it also ends on C. So that's very often the last note of a melody is the key that we're in. Da, that's the note that sounds the most resolved, the most final. It can be a little tricky to figure out what key you're in songs. But if you see a bunch of chords, if you look up a song online and you see a bunch of chords, let's say they look like this, and that most of the chords you're seeing in the song are these, probably one of these 4 is the key that you're in. And in this case, I'll tell you, because these are very common, it's going to be either this or this. You're either going to be in the key of G or in the key of E minor. Now, let's avoid minor keys for a minute since they get a little more complicated, and let's just focus on the key of G. So how do we make the key of G? Well, start on a G, now go up a whole step, 2 half steps. Now we're on A. I'm going to write these notes out one at a time. Go up another whole step, B, half step, C, and so forth, and you'll find these notes, F sharp, and then back to G again. And again, each one has a number. Now G is number 1 because we're in the key of G. And the pentatonic scale means no 4 and no 7. So your G pentatonic scale are these, and then the major scale will put the 4 and 7 back in. So this is the idea of scale and key in a nutshell.